Hi, this is Dr. Taz, and welcome to this edition of Talk with TAS. Today, I have with me Laura Browne. Now, if you're looking for a job, if you've been trying to figure out why can't I get where I'm trying to go, is it the way I'm interviewing? Is it that I'm selecting the wrong jobs? Well, this is the episode for you. Today, Laura and I are going to break down what it means to sort of stop playing it small at work and then to ask or advocate for the salary that you know that you need. So I want to welcome Laura Browne. She's a coach, she's a former tech executive, and the author of the game-changing book that helps you own the interview and land the job you deserve. Laura, welcome to Talk with TAS.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm super excited. Thank you.
Well, we're going to jump right in. What was the moment that made you say, I need to write this book?
Well, it's funny. It wasn't just my moment. So a couple of years ago, I was talking to a friend of mine, Barbara, and she's also been in HR for years. And actually, for many years, her job was to do interview coaching. She would coach people before they went out on interviews. And we were talking about like some terrible interviews that we had had. And I suddenly said, Barbara, I think there's a book there because people need to know what we know. And honestly, she said, nah, we're not writing a book. And so I thought, no, I really think, because again, we know insider secrets. We know what really happens behind the curtain. Mm-hmm. And so honestly, I bugged her for a while. I kept going, Barbara, I think that there's a book there. And finally, she got back to me and said, Laura, you're probably right. I think there's a book there. And so it's been about 3 years since that point. It took us a while to write it and to get it through our publisher, but I'm super glad we have it now because, oh my gosh, the job market, it is so difficult. So this is the perfect time, and we're super excited to get it out there for people.
I was thinking that also, Laura, because I've got the book on Kindle, and you're right, timing is everything. And this is the perfect time for you to present this information and share it with not just your current audience, but really with the world, because everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, but a lot of people are shifting. You've always got those individuals who typically would shift within a year, but then with the different layoffs that have occurred across our country, you've got more individuals who are looking for their next big job. So I think that the book is really going to be a good accompanying piece for people as they look at other resources or how do I manage this process. Now, your experience as a with global tech companies shaped the advice that you give in this book. How did it help you to shape that advice? Because we know technology with the advent of AI is really huge right now. So how did your experiences have shaped this book?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I worked for a couple of global tech companies, and I have trained people around the world. And so I'm used to dealing with a lot of different people. And what's interesting is one of the things, because I did a lot of training, one of the things I trained on is I trained managers how to interview. And so at that point, even though I had interviewed plenty of times, I had to learn more about interviewing. And so that experience, when I was helping managers to actually do a better job as interviewing, really helped me to shape this book. Because again, I could see good interviews, I could see bad interviews, and also in the classes, when I talked to the managers, I could see some of the sort of preconceived notions that they came with. And so, some interviewers come with the idea, well, I know the right questions to ask and things like that. And so actually in the book, we talk about bad interviewers as well as good interviews. And you never know who you're going to get. You never know if you're going to get a terrible interviewer who simply reads from the piece of paper or who has some odd questions. And so all of those experiences really helped me to write this book right now.
Well, I was going through the book, and one of the things that stuck out with me was, it's just like you said, there are interviewers who think they are great interviewers, and then there's some that are not so good. But the thing that interviewees need to understand that the question that they're hearing is not really the question that is being asked. So could you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. And so really, we look at this book as a translation book, that you're actually almost learning the language of interviewers. And so the idea is that people hear something like, okay, let me give you a typical one. People here, tell me about yourself. And so they think, let's see, I went to this college and I did this, and they sort of, go through their resume. That's not what interviewers want. What they really want to find out, the question really is, tell me about yourself in a way so I understand you and why you should get this job. And connect with me a little bit so I like you a little bit. And so in the book, we talk about how to make a quick connection, but then we also talk about in less than a minute. How do you, less than a minute, because you can't go on and on. In less than a minute, how do you take 2 or 3 key things that are important about you that connect to this job? And so by answering it in that way, in the first couple of minutes of the interview, because typically that's a pretty typical question, the interviewers think, oh, this person gets it. This person is interested in this job. This is going to be a good interview. So we take a lot of these questions. We break them down. Sometimes we even use sentence diagrams, and we break down, what does the interviewer mean when they say recent? What does the interviewer mean when they say difficult? And so we talk about that, again, to help people create their best answers.
And I think that is so important, because it is unnerving when someone says, well, tell me about yourself. Well, what am I telling you? It's like, oh, they want, and you say, like, folks, when you went back and explained to, as you guys were doing your research, what they were really asking, it's like, oh, well, I could have answered that question, but they didn't understand what the question truly meant. And I guess for me, it's like, when you walk into the interview, you have to keep the lens on that says, this is an interview. Everything that I'm saying should relate back to that job description.
Yes. It's so interesting you say that. And we actually have a whole section where we break down job descriptions, and we take a look at, if the job description says this, here are some questions you might be asked to help you to prepare. Here's the other thing I want everyone to keep in mind. Interviewers are looking for 3 things. First, they're looking for, can you do the job? Now, that's the typical. That's normally what we spend time on the interview. Yeah, I can do this job. And that's why you've got the resume there. And you talk about, I did something similar. Mm-hmm. We don't often focus on the second one. The second one, though, is, do you want this job? Are you excited about this job? Because I know you want a job because you applied for it. Mm-hmm. But why do you want this job? Convince me that you're excited about this job, that you're motivated. So if we hire you, you won't get bored or quit in a couple of months. And then I, the interviewer, will look bad. And we have some insider stories about real situations that happen. One insider story was somebody, an interviewer asked a candidate, why do you want this job? And honest to goodness, he answered, why not? And he sort of smirked. Yeah. He did not get the job. But so the point is, you need to really make sure that they know that you want this job. Now, the third thing interviewers want to know, and often it doesn't come up in the first interview, the third thing is, will you fit in with this culture? Will you be a good member of the team? Or are you going to stick out and it's going to be a problem? So again, especially the first interview, you want to point out, I can do the job and I'm super excited and I really want to be here. And this is why I'm motivated. And if you can do that, chances are better that you will move forward in the interview process.
Now, let me see if I'm looking at my little scribble here, if I can reiterate these 3 things for the audience, because this is very important, because we've talked about the fact, understand what the question is behind the question. But 1, can you do the job? You got to convey that you can actually do the job. Then 2, why do you want the job? You've got to show your excitement in an authentic way, because as you said, and it makes very good sense, we don't think about this when we're interviewing, you don't want the hiring manager to look bad, because it does reflect on their decision making if they make the wrong selection. And then will you fit in? The third one is, will you fit into this culture, or are you going to stick out as a sore thumb? And that makes a huge difference. So thank you for dropping those 3 things, because I don't think that we think about those when we're actually interviewing. And so that explains why someone could have everything on paper, but they don't fit the culture. They didn't show that they were excited, even if they were excited. And even though they can do the job, it's one thing to be able to do the job. And that's going to kind of sound wonky the way I'm going to say this. A person can do the job and do excellent, but then there's a person who can do that job. And when they do that job, I'm going to say it, they doing it with a smile. They may not be 100% all the time, but they love that work. They love the people. They can do the job. And I think what you're trying to convey to the audience is that managers want that second person. They may not have 100% of everything, but they can do the job, and they're going to do it, and they're going to love doing it, and they're going to build that team, and they're going to keep the culture going. That's what the hiring manager is looking for.
Exactly. And so you hit on something so important. You can have 2 people or 5 people or whatever, and one person, on paper looks great and does a good interview, but the other person who may only have 90% or even less, but they have that motivation. I will tell you, so often the manager says, I want that person. I can train them, but I feel their motivation. I feel their excitement. And I think that they're going to be a great person. They're not going to get bored. So yeah, you have to show up as that excited, motivated person ready to do this job.
Okay, guys, y'all heard that. Show up as excited, motivated person who's ready to do this job. Not what, why not? No. This job, because that's the job that you're applying for. Now, if someone only had time to read one chapter before their interview, people have interviews scheduled today, they got them scheduled tomorrow. If they had a chance to read just one chapter, what chapter should they not skip and why?
Oh, and I love that question. They need to read chapter 2. And here's the reason why. Chapter 2 talks about common questions. So what we did is we took typical questions like, tell me about yourself. Tell me about a weakness. Why do you want this job? And so chances are, especially in early interviews, you're going to be asked some of these questions. So don't miss that chapter.
So chapter 2, guys, you've heard it here first. If you only have a chance to read one chapter, go with chapter 2 because it's going to give you those common questions. And the authors are going to help you to figure out how do you address those questions as it relates to the job that you are going to be interviewing for.
Okay. Yes.
Now, how does your approach to interviews challenge the traditional advice people hear? So, we got a lot of people talking to us.
Well, so it's interesting because a lot of other interview books say, here are the answers. Here's 101 answers to the 100, to the top 100 questions or whatever. And we don't do that. And so what we say instead is, you don't want the best answer. You want your best answer. And so I would challenge people to not find like the pat answer, because I'll tell you right now, we've heard it plenty of times that when somebody is saying the answer that they have read. And I know a friend of mine actually sometimes sort of calls BS on it. Like, oh, seriously, give me your answer. So you don't want to be in that situation. So instead, I want you to think about knowing that they're going to ask this or ask that. What's my best answer? Because I want to come across not as somebody perfect, because we know that nobody's perfect, but as a real person giving real examples. And so that's part of the preparation. You need to think about, okay, here's what they could ask. Here's how I want to answer it the best way possible. So I show up as my best self. And that's what we help people do. We really help people to prepare.
Now, I like that because I'm reading from the beginning of the book. And somewhere in there, if I recall correctly, you talked about preparation and everything that you're saying. And to me, this is how this book sort of fills the gap with other maybe job hunting books. You're talking about being prepared, not learning a script. And so when you talk about in the book, you talk about doing your research as it relates to the company. Would you share with the audience a little bit about, because folks are accustomed to doing the research, but they don't know how to then incorporate the research into their responses to questions.
Great question. So obviously you're going to do research on the company. And by the way, if you have the name of the person, get on LinkedIn and do research on them. Obviously you don't need to do a deep dive, but maybe, you both we both lived in North Carolina, or maybe, if there's some sort of connection, you can make it. But obviously you want to go to the company's website, look at their information, but you should also be doing a search on what are new stories coming out about the company. Now, if they're bad stories, don't mention them, okay? Mm-hmm. But if they're good stories, you can ask about it, because here's the other thing there where people make a mistake. At the end, when they say, what sort of questions do you have for me? Some people think, oh, I shouldn't look like I have questions. I'll just say none. Bad idea. Instead, this is where you could ask a question or two and show that you did your research. Yeah, I do have a question. I read that your company is now going to be opening a new European branch. Can you tell me more about it? Because I've worked in Europe before and I'm really interested. Boom. What that says is I have paid attention. I am looking into this information. I have spent the time necessary to do the research, so I am interested. And then you make the connection between where you are and where they are. So that's super, super important. The other thing I always say, and again, you can ask different questions. I like to ask the question, tell me what you like best about working at this company. And I told this to somebody recently, and she used it, and she said, Laura, the woman's eyes went wide, oh, let me tell you what I love about this. And so again, it sort of made a connection, and the person who was interviewing got to know a little bit more about the company. So it all comes together that you need to bring this in, you need to be ready and ask some good questions at the end.
Oh, now, Lord, I like that one. I like both of them. And I like the way you very smoothly wove in the fact that I worked in Europe at one point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that was very smooth, because that says, oh, so this person may have been an expat. They are they're accustomed to different cultures. Mm-hmm. So and then the fact that we're opening up a European branch, all the things that this person could bring to that process and to the company as a whole. So that was very smooth. And then I like the idea of, tell me what you like best about the company.
Mm-hmm.
Because you are making a connection. And then from there, depending upon what the person says, you may be able to respond and then respond again and show how, oh, I like that. And that
exactly.
That makes you memorable.
Yes. That is a memorable question at the end. And again, you are trying to stand out. You are trying to have them remember you, that, oh yeah, that was a candidate that worked in Europe, or that was a candidate that was just really, really nice and, good to talk to. So yes, you're trying to do all of these things. And so in different parts of the book, we talk about it. Now, I will also tell you there's a part in the book, if you have time, read chapter 12. Chapter 12 is an actual interview. So we actually go through, Mia is being interviewed. And so you can actually read, and the interviewer actually interrupts her a couple of times. And we talk about why did the interviewer interrupt her? What could she have done better? And so it's almost like you're seeing somebody else's interview. And it's kind of fun because you can learn from it, from our suggestions in there.
So chapter 2.
Chapter 2. It's the most important.
Chapter 12. So guys,
chapter 12.
You got the questions. And
yep.
They're going to talk to you about breaking those down and then see how it looks in actuality when it's happening.
Yep.
So 2 and 12, guys. I just want to make sure they don't forget that, because they may have time to at least get through 2 chapters. Or a chapter.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's important. So what's the number one mistake you've seen even smart, experienced professionals make during the interviews? And they could be a person who interviews all the time themselves.
Oh, yeah. And that's funny, because sometimes people who interview a lot think, oh, I can do this, And if you have been an interviewee, a lot of times you think, I can do this. So the biggest mistake I see over and over again is lack of preparation. And the reason I hear is not that people didn't have time. I literally have heard people say, no, I want to show up as my authentic self. I want to just wing it. I just want to be me. And I always say you can be you and be your authentic self and be prepared. Because think about it. If you're prepared and you've picked some good, let's say, stories and some good examples, not memorized anything, but you have some things in your back pocket, then you're going to go to the interview and you're going to be calmer and a little less stressed, because you're like, yeah, I know, I'm ready for this. And so it'll be easier for you to be your authentic self. So that is probably the biggest mistake. Now, it's funny because in our book, we have different characters who are asked questions. And we have a character named Clueless Clark. And Clueless Clark came about because early readers of the book said, we want bad examples. You keep giving good examples. Give me something bad. So Clueless Clark makes silly mistakes. And one of the mistakes he makes is he just shows up and doesn't plan. Because he just wants to be himself, and he knows that he can just on the fly just say examples. But afterwards, it's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have done this. And so we talked about what Clueless Clark does wrong and what you should do differently. And so people learn from good examples and bad examples of what you shouldn't say.
Well, that's good, because I've read there are several different ways that you should structure your response. The one that pops in my mind is the STAR. Do you guys believe there is a certain method that you should use to try to deliver that response in a minute? We actually mentioned, I think, 4 different ones, but STAR is probably the most that people use. The whole point is, no matter what you do, you want to have it planned and want to be prepared. And probably the biggest thing is think about some very specific examples that you can pull from. So I typically tell people, like, pick, 7 to 10 examples, depending on what the job is, because chances are the interviewer is going to ask things like, tell me about a time, give me an example, can you explain when you did this? And if you already have those great examples, and typically I try to pick examples that maybe an example might help you show your leadership and your communication and your problem solving. So no matter what they ask, you pull it out of your pocket and you give this example. So that really helps you to show up the best way you can. I like that, because it all still goes back to preparation.
Yes, it does.
Preparation. So say someone has done an interview. Mm-hmm. So how can you turn that bad or an awkward interview moment around in real time? Because sometimes we just space out. How can we?
Yes. Okay. So glad you asked that, because not only do sometimes you space out, sometimes they ask you a question like, I don't know. Now, one of the things we talk about, first of all, is you should always listen to the whole question, because a lot of times the mistake people make is they hear the first part of a question. Tell me about a time when you worked with a team. And you're like, I have it. But you don't hear the second part of the question is, tell me about a time you worked with a team and there were problems and you had to do something. So the point is, or you're sort of spinning and you're not sure, you can pause. So don't feel, first of all, that you have to jump in. A second to you might feel like an hour, but it's not. Or sometimes, I've had people just say, let me think about that, and I've heard people say, you know what, I've never been asked that. Now, if it's a common question, don't say that. But if it's a question like, if you were a font, what kind of font would you be? Then you can say, I have never thought about that. Okay. Mm-hmm. But for typical questions, if you just sort of space out, you can just say, you know what, let me just think for a moment, pause for a minute, and then pull something out. Now, you can always be human and just like, oh my gosh, I just had a moment. Could you repeat that? Or another thing you could do is just say, I'm not sure that I got that. Could you say that again? Or are you asking about this or are you asking about this? So don't feel you have to jump in and throw some stuff at them. And sometimes, if you have that brain problem and you forget, it's okay to be human and say, could you say that again? I didn't quite hear the end of that. And then sometimes you can even turn it into something funny. It also depends on the interviewer and the connection that you're making with the interviewer.
And thank you for sharing that, because sometimes we do need permission, even though in the heat of it, we know we can, but we need that permission to ask, can you give me just a second? Can you read that? Because you're hearing, and it's so much information, and it's a stressful situation.
Oh, it is.
Think of it that way, but it is sort of stressful. You're trying to do all those 3 things and leave that lasting impression. And sometimes, like you said, we only hear the first part, and then we in our mind what we're going to say, and then we hear the last part, and it's like, oh, what did I miss in between? Just ask them to repeat it in real time, then respond, versus thinking, oh my God, I completely messed up. Because sometimes I nervous get the best of it. It's like,
Yeah.
So now, I got to go here because, money is important.
Oh, yeah.
Why do people struggle with negotiating a salary, and how can we change that mindset?
Oh, my gosh, there are so many reasons. Give me a couple of hours. We'll talk about it. So I've actually written a couple of books on how to negotiate a raise. Increase your income, 7 rules for women who want to make more money at work, but it's for men too. And actually I did a fiction book about the same topic. But the fact is, we're already in a stressful situation and it's stressing us out about money. And then some people say, well, money isn't everything, or if I negotiate, it's going to be a problem. And then, so I'll give you what happens in a lot of interviews. That you're in the first interview, you're thinking, it's going well. Okay. And then they say, so tell me about the salary you want. And they're like, oh no. And the fear is, I'm going to mess this up. Yes. Okay. And then I'm going to lose a job. All right. I'm going to tell you a secret about what you should actually say. And I have used this, and plenty of the people I've worked with have used this. So when they say, what salary do you want? What you do is you say, what's the salary range for this position? And honest to goodness, in most cases, they will tell you. Now, they won't tell you all the time, but what you can, if they say, well, it's still being decided, or, we're not sure, what salary range are you looking for? You can then say, well, I need to know a little bit more about the job. So can you tell me a little bit more about this, and this? Now, sometimes they'll just look, just tell me what salary range you want, okay? But most of the time, like the first question can get you actually a number. And the first question, again, when you say, well, what's the salary range? And they say it's between X and Y. If that's fine, you just say, that's what I'm looking for, or that's within my range. Good, and just let it go. And the reason you want to do that is you want to wait until they love you at the end and they think you're a perfect candidate, and that's when you negotiate. Now, if they really say, look, just give me a number, okay, I just want to know, if we're in the range, you should have done your research before and looked at similar jobs. And so what you say is, based on my research, what I found are similar jobs are between X and Y. Is this job between X and Y? Now, you have to make sure X is what you would take. X is going to be on the lower thing, but if you say X and you're thinking, I don't want X, and they offer you X, then it's a problem. But you're basically giving them a range, and it needs to be, make it a big range, because it needs to be big enough that I'd take the bottom, but I really want the top, and chances are I'm going to be someplace in between. Does that help?
It does. So, folks have got to get Interview Speaks. So what you're saying is, because I know in a lot of organizations now we have the transparency. So you're seeing the salaries listed. So right. We know what the salary is, the salary band. So you're saying, do your market research, preparation, guys, preparation. Do your market research, and let's say the salary is, I'm gonna make it really nice, 100 to 150,000.
Right.
Okay. So midpoint, I'm going to say maybe it's about 130, just because this is rough math. So after you've done your market research, if you know that the market is saying 25 to the 150, then you're saying that the individual should say, oh, I was looking at something between 125 and say 135, and be prepared to take the 125 if they come back and offer that. But you still got that $10,000 stand, so that
Well, I'm going to push back actually on what you said. First of all, I would not say I'm looking for 125 to 135. That's too small. Make it bigger, and all because then that you've just told them there's only a 10. So if I were to give a number, which I prefer not, I don't want to give the first number. I'd say I'm looking for 125 to 160. I mean, I want it big, okay? Because if you make it too low, they're going to say, oh, I don't think this person can do it. So you have to be careful about that. Now, the other thing, though, is if it already says, which for salary transparency, a number of companies are putting down, so let's say between 100 and 125. If they say, what salary are you looking for? I saw that it said between 100 and 125, and that's what I'm looking for, or that's within my range. So all you have to do is acknowledge it. Don't give them another number.
This is a hard thing, because a lot of us were not taught to negotiate.
No.
So I'm glad I gave the example that I did. So basically, it's within the range, because if they're giving you the salary, then it's within the range of my expectations.
Yes, that's it. And here's the reason why: because interviewers don't want to waste their time on you if your salary expectation is too low or too high. And so they want to know a lot of times. And so if you just say it's within the range, like, okay, good, check that box off. we can continue. But then at the end,
Mm-hmm.
when you've said, yeah, I want that range, the end, when they offer you the job, that's when you negotiate. Yeah, but I want the higher part of the range. I don't want the lower part. But that's a whole nother discussion. And again, we don't really cover this in the Interview Speak book. We cover it very briefly, but I do cover it in my other book, which is basically it basically talks about how to get a raise at work, but it also briefly talks about how to get a higher starting salary. And actually on my website, I have training classes on that. So there are other methods you can get this information.
Well, Laura, I mean, you are the go-to guru for jobs and negotiating your salary, getting a raise and getting the money that you want. I have learned so much from you today, and I know that the audience has also. How can they get Interview Speak and how can they stay in touch with you?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. So they can get Interview Speak on Amazon. However, if they go to my publisher's website, manning.com, there's a special deal that they can get by using TAS Limmer. So for your site, so for the audience here. In addition, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Tell me that you saw me or heard me on this show. I would love to connect with you. Or you can go to my website, careercoffeebreak.com. And I have some more information there as well as my other books, and you can read my newsletter. So I would love to connect with your audience and help them to get the job that they want.
Well, Laura, I know that they'll be reaching out. As I said, I've already got my copy of Interview Speaks, and it is a wealth of information. And I just appreciate your coming on and sharing all your knowledge with the audience. And just know I may be reaching out again to invite you to come back. And we just go at a specific topic, and that way it's like, okay, that clarifies things for folks. So again, thank you so much for being a part of Talk with TAS. And to my audience, you know the drill. Before you go trying to take care of someone else, please make sure you take care of yourself first. Bye now.